the last welcome to the last SAFPAC Seminar of 2024. Delighted that we have to travel far to hopefully travel far tonight. And Onel here, Onel Brooks, is going to talk about how to begin a conversation with psychotherapists about the beginning of the conversation that is Republic.
Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you all for coming, first of all. And I have a plan, which of course might go out the window very soon, but it's to talk about a client, first of all. So, if this has been recorded, so I'd like the client to be removed, not recorded. So talk about a client. 20 minutes or so, and then talk about the Republic. And I hope I'm not going to be talking to myself. I hope you're all going to be talking with me about the Republic. And then I might say a bit about the film. I don't know if any of you have a look. It'd be interesting to hear what you have to say about it. So, first of all, a bit of client material. So, I don't want to sort of, talk a bit about it, but that's not really why I'm talking tonight. I'm hoping to talk more about Republic, if I can. And I hope some of you had a look at least the first pages of it. I don't really know what you maybe you tell me on the what I want to say, though, to sort of start it off, is that I read Republic some time ago when I was a student, and I think I might have read it a couple of times. And I tried to read it again this time, and I had no idea. I couldn't work out. It didn't seem familiar to me at all. It was just very different. Towards quite far in, I began to worry that I don't understand it at all. I wonder how much you understand it all, so you might enlighten me about that. Why I say that is that there are a couple of places in it that I don't think I noticed the first time. One of them is about 536, which is not one of the places I asked you to read, where there is a comment. Socrates is talking to Glaucon, and he says, "I forgot, I said, that we were playing, and I spoke to Ernest." One. And a little bit later, he says, "Train your children in their studies, not by compulsion, but by games." There's a bit of me that wants to say, maybe there's much more playing games in the Republic. If you haven't read into it, it might not be easy to see, because I think people get into this idea that it's some sort of totalitarian state text. That's what it's all is about. But it's clearly not simple about that. That is there, but it's complicated. And I want to say, if you can think, there's a question, isn't there? I mean, I didn't want to come here and try and read everything at you. But I guess how things are said and when things are said must be quite crucial. So this is not Plato sitting in I don't know where he'd be in the assembly or giving a formal lecture. This is a story about going off to a friend's house and having this conversation. One in which Socrates is doing all kinds of things, like later on he's been coy about some things. He says, "I don't know how I should have the nerve to tell it." They're basically saying, "Get on with it, just get on with it." Or do you think anyone's going to let you leave before you tell us? So there's a lot going on, which I want to sort of disrupt the idea that you know exactly what it's about. It's about totalitarian state.
It's interesting that you say that because I reread it again, just 5 pages today. And there's a bit right at the top when the names are a blizzard to me, so I'm just going to talk in where people that Socrates has seen across the square send their slave over and they meet. And I read it and it seemed like there was a confrontation. And it must be. So I read it again, and it's playful, isn't it? It's like, well, how are you going to teach us if we don't want to listen? And it's that, and I thought, I mean, that's not a big idea, but it's like, this is written playfully, isn't it?
Yes.
How is being playful?
Yes. No, thank you. That's really important. That's where I want to go now, just now, because I think that there's a way in which we can think that the Republic has got quite a lot to do with the person that it presented and that exchange. Because certainly in the Republic, I think there are issues about race, ethnicity, prejudice, domination, death, inheritance, therefore relatedness. Because there's all kinds of stuff going on about, Glaucon is with Glaucon, and Glaucon's brother turns up, and Glaucon's other brother happens to be Plato, and he says, what is it? Nicias is the son of I can't remember who, but this is easily parodied. But there's all kinds of things going on there about relatedness, I think. But the point that you made, I think, is crucial, isn't it? So the story is that Socrates and Glaucon have gone to a festival in Piraeus, and it's the first of its kind, I think. And on their way back, they're seen by Polemarchus, who was one of the main characters. And Polemarchus sends his slave, which I think has already opened up all kinds of things, a slave boy, to run after them and to stop them and ask them to wait. So he does that, and then they come up, the party come up to them, and they say something like, "You see how many of us there are? There's only 2 of you. You're going to do what we tell you. Or you need to get the better of us." And Socrates says, "Well, maybe there's a third alternative. Maybe there's another alternative. Maybe we can persuade you to let us go. So there's an alternative that maybe they can have a talk about something rather than, one of them has got to be the master and the other one's got to be the slave. There's one way of sort of listening to them." And they say, "So you think you can persuade those who won't listen," or something like that, which I think was a really important comment. I think they come up again in the Republic. How do you persuade people who won't listen? How do you even talk to them? How do you have a conversation with them? That's not what they want. They're going to be the master, whatever. I think a very important thing. So I want to say the Republic begins with death. First line is "I went down." The first phrase is "I went down." And there is a way in which, of course, the sun goes down, and there is a way in which, by the time the book is written, Socrates is already dead, down. He's already finished in a way. And of course, I can't resist saying in Zarathustra, at the beginning, there is something about Zarathustra's going down, which was playing. So, I don't plan to sort of go on and on about this without much from you, but I wanted to say that there's something about that exchange with Cephalus. I hope that you looked at that and realized there was something interesting in it. He says something like, I can't find it now, but he says Cephalus is an old man, and Socrates seems to be saying he's become much older since I last saw him. And there is I think a contrast between that not production at a festival where basically Socrates and Glaucon are taken prisoner, not participating in the game by the party, when they get to speak to Cephalus, he's different, and he says, you know, when I was younger, I could come and visit you more often. I can't now. You should come more often. You should stay. You know, stay and enjoy. So a different sort of thing, a different sort of way of wanting Socrates to be there. Maybe less playful. What am I saying about that? I'm trying to tell you something. Trying to find the right page. Well, they have a talk really about death and life after death, don't they? That's what they do. I can remember. Socrates seems to say to him, to Cephalus, how is old age? Is it nice? Cephalus starts to say it's not as bad as some people say, or some people think, or something like that. And there's a sort of discussion. Socrates says, well, people might think that it's fine with you because you've got quite a bit of money, you know, you're wealthy. And there's something in those 5 pages, first 5 pages, about being old and poor, and how terrible that is. I think that's worth noting. Cephalus talks about how a group of them get together, you know, at the same age, and they talk about life. And some of them seem to say life is really terrible in old age. But he's saying, you know, I think depending on who you are, whether or not you're young or old, it's not so much the issue. It depends on what sort of character you are. Something like that. I want to say too, before I quieten down, that it's usually said, and you might have heard it in the program with Melvin Bryant in our time, where they say that there's an analogy that they're playing with in Republic between the state and the person, the individual. And the idea is that if you want to know what a good state is like, well, if you want to know what a good individual is like, first of all, you look at a good state, because the state is the individual writ large, or whatever it is. You can see it better in the state. But you see, I think that's true that there isn't an analogy, but I think there's also something going on from those first 5 pages, which is to do with the different soil that plants are grown. And there's an exchange. In the exchange, there's something about a man from Athens and a man from Seriphus. And the man from Seriphus says, you're only famous because you were born in Athens, or you're from Athens. And he says, the man from Athens says, well, you know, if I was in Seriphus, I wouldn't be famous. If you were born in Athens, if you were in Athens, you wouldn't be famous either. You know? And there's something, isn't there, about the place that you're at. It's not simply. So I want to say it's not simply about an analogy. It's something about the state. The state has something to do with the state that you're in. No, the state that you're in has something to do with the state that you are. That's even.
They both kind of work.
You think that's good? Yeah. I know it's there somewhere. Something like that.
Talking about privilege in a way, is he? Do you think? There's a line where he says something about what money can get you, and it's peace of mind, he says.
Yes.
And I think, I can't remember rightly, but does he then walk, does that character that says that then just disappears for all the conversations? Says something about peace of mind and leaves.
Well, he goes to tend to the sacrifice. It's all the sort of.
Right. He doesn't want to stay around for the confrontation, is what I'm kind of saying.
I don't know. He doesn't stay around. I think because his interests are maybe more. I don't know how Asian studies actually. When I think about it, but there's an idea. I think that his interests now are much more about the sacrifices and the rituals, and that there are these younger men who are sitting around talking about justice, politics.
Although he does say, I think he does say that passion is waned for him, but his pleasure now is in conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He said it was a sort of relief almost. I thought.
Yeah, but then he does leave for the conference.
I got the sense that it was a relief to not have to be burdened with all that potency. He quite like the relief of it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It's a story. There's a story there about, I think it's Sophocles. That someone says to Sophocles, "How's your love life? Can you still make love to a woman?" or something like that. And he says, "Don't mention it, Mike. Don't mention it, I guess," or something like that. And there's something about how it's like being freed from a fierce and frenzied lust. When you no longer have the passions. And I think Cephalus is sort of saying something about how important that is, how good that is, and how old age is like a kind of freedom.
Yeah.
Some of these things.
Sold it to me in a way, old age. But I don't know if there's something going on. I didn't know if there was an ironic sort of play of the slave being there, and then we're setting up a conversation about justice and injustice, and there's a slave boy in the mix, and then we're talking about wealth and privilege. And for me, there's privileges in it there at the beginning, and then he departs, but I'm left thinking about the peace of mind that he's talking about, and what about my own peace of mind to be able to find time in the evening to sit and read this, my own privilege and our privilege, and are we all,
Well, it is about privilege, and you're absolutely right that there is something, isn't there, about this slave boy and slaves and women and non-citizens. And non-citizens, they don't get the right to vote, speak in the assembly, and there's something going on right at the beginning about masters and slaves, as we were saying. I'm more powerful than you. You must do what I tell you.
Yeah, but in the case of where we're at now, we were talking about this a few weeks ago. I mean, the kind of slaves, if you want to use it as an analogy, for us that we're all standing upon to be masters in our own right, are kind of invisible, overlooked, not really thought about too much. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody more so than myself when I say that. But for them to even have this conversation, are they sort of? Are they? How just is it really from the beginning? Well, it raises the question for me anyway.
Well, one of the things that we might talk about is what does justice mean?
Yeah.
What is it we're talking about? But you're right, actually, that they are free-born Athenians, and they are quite privileged. They can speak, they're citizens, and we told that Cephalus is quite wealthy, and he's going to Polymarchus as his heir. That's the joke in there. But in the conversation, it's taken up by his heir. Cephalus goes off to pray or whatever it is, and his son takes note. So there is quite a bit about wealth, and I think he's acknowledging that, Cephalus, in his speech, about it makes life easier, but it's not as important as people think he wants to say. I might be false, but he's trying to say it depends really. It depends on how you're constituted. Let's say what do you like. That he wants to say might be more important. I think he says somewhere in it that there are wealthy people who are quite unhappy or whatever.
He said they were unhappy as youths as well as being as old people, didn't he? I think he made
yes.
That some people are as unhappy as old people as they were when they were young.
Yes, something like that.
It feels like he's sort of
as happy in youth as in old age. I think something.
Well, as unhappy, I think.
Yeah, as unhappy in youth as old
They're
age.
sort of dissatisfied with their lot.
Find something to be miserable
There's
about.
something. Now I'm only thinking this now because I didn't think when I read it. There seems to be a little bit arrogant about this wealthy guy expounding this idea that
Money isn't everything.
Well, it doesn't seem to take into account that there may be factors involved in not having any money that might make you more miserable above and beyond your character. And that seems reflected a little bit in the Athenian and the guy from wherever it was, begins with an S.
Yes.
I mean, it's a great put down. It might, even if you were from Athens, kind of, you'd be a failure. It seems what he's saying, but So it comes with the baggage of arrogance about an assumption about that guy. He might be amazing.
It might be what?
He might be amazing. Maybe we'll kind of go get that.
No, it's very difficult. I don't think Catalyst is sort of denying that money helps. I think he says, look, if you've got money, you can pay your debts. You can make the sacrifices, etc. And when you die and go to the world beneath, you're square with the gods. And if you owe someone anything, you've got money to pay them off. If you don't have money, of course you're in big trouble, both ways. So I think he's acknowledging that money is important, but he wants to say it's not everything. And I think I think he's trying to acknowledge that, of course, where you happen to live is not everything. It's not like, I think some people want to say, the state determines who you are, determines who you are. But he wants to say it's important. It provides the sort of soil out of which you might grow, or out of which growing might be very difficult.
May I say something?
Of course, please.
If I understood correctly, I wanted to go back to this scene that Polymachus sends his slave asking Plato to wait. Yes. You see how many of us, and then Socrates if I understood you correctly, Socrates says something about we can talk about this rather than being rather stuck in this sort of master and slave confrontation. My qualm with that is not so much that the Republic presents a sort of authoritarian view, is more that when we look at the origin of this form of dialogue that Socrates was a master of, there is an element, an implicit element of coercion, an element of coercion. You're supposed to speak, and Socrates is going to be the one who elicits and brings out the truth. And there's a very strong noise that I'm assuming it's the boxing. So I wonder whether it would be good to question the dialogical mode that Socrates excels in, and to look at it historically. There was a book by some guy called Aaron Fogel, and he charts this whole thing of the dialogical mode, and he mentioned something in the Greek tradition called anakrisis, a dialogical form which was used in the court to judge and condemn. And in short, could there be an element of coercion in Socratic dialogical form, which we have perhaps glossed over and perhaps over romanticized?
I probably should give your question a bit more thought, but I don't think that it's quite glossed over, because I think there is more that's problematic about what Socrates is doing. I mean, I'm not even sure how much the Republic is actually a conversation, and how much it is a bit of a sham conversation, where Plato is putting all sorts of things into Socrates' mouth, and Socrates is sort of, so it's not. That's why I say it's not straightforward. There's a bit later on where Socrates says that he's talking about banning some works, and they want to ban the poets. They want to ban Homer, and he says one of the problems with Homer is when Homer is writing, he writes as if he's, say, I don't know, he writes as if he's one of the characters. I can't remember the characters now. He writes as if he's Odysseus, for example, Odysseus speaking, and of course it's not Odysseus speaking; it is Homer writing. But actually, when you think about that that is Socrates, that is Plato, talking as if he's Socrates, saying that about. So the idea that he would ban those books, and of course the idea is that Republic will be banned as well, because Republic is doing exactly the same thing that he thinks it. So I'm saying I'm not really very clear about it. I don't think I want to gloss over it so much. I think the whole thing is problematic, and I think that one of the interesting things is that it's not clear who's abducted whom as time goes on. It's more the case that Socrates seems to have got them, and they're all sitting there, sort of, or apparently standing there, waiting for him to sort of, expand on his idea, this idea of the ideal state and the ideal person. So it's complicated, I think.
The way I remember reading it was he gets rid of things like poetry because it has too much passion in it. So in order to have the ideal state, you almost have to get rid of, a bit like what we were saying earlier, where maybe the old man no longer has the same kind of desire as he did when he was young. And by not having that, by removing passion, by removing poetry itself, which is full of passion, you get towards an ideal state. But I guess that's partly where the criticism that it's totalizing comes in as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there is a thing about passion, isn't there? And someone quoting it that Cephalus says something about the more the pleasures of the body fades, the more you enjoy conversation or something like that. So I think there's something. But I guess we're in that business, aren't we, psychotherapists?
Yes.
We're in the whole thing about you keep the pleasures of the body kind of vanished in order to sort of conversation going, aren't we, in some ways?
We do it here as well. I think Dale maybe sometimes wants to suggest we are doing that.
Is there anything about conflating being a master and being free, as opposed to being a slave and not being? We're saying that you can be wealthy and not be happy, and poor and happy, and all these parallels. And yet, what about the idea of being a master and not being happy, even if you have freedom in the technical sense? Just like your client who came in and said, "My family's great, everything is great." There's this sense of being a master in his own right.
Yeah.
To what extent is he free?
Is that a question that might be thought of as close to the heart of what is going on in the book? Because isn't there the idea that that Thrasymachus, which comes later, you can get those pages. He tries to argue that, of course, the sensible thing to do would be for you to sort of always pursue your own advantage, something like that. And so it's that you have, I don't know, let's say mastery over situations and other people. Hopefully we'll talk a bit about the Ring of Gyges, but that's part of that story, isn't it? The Ring of Gyges, did any of you read that?
Is that the invisibility ring?
That's the
Shepherd.
So the shepherd has the ring. So the shepherd, rather, what happens is that there's an earthquake, and the ground is opens up. Now, I think Plato is really fascinating. Just to say, Plato's really fascinating because there's always this movement about going upwards to the form. But there's often this thing about going downwards. It's like, it's as if there's a counter pull all the time. So the ground opens up after a storm, the shepherd goes down, he sees a dead body which is bigger than human. I think it's loaded so much. I think, first of all, if I go down into a place and I see a dead body, I'm not going to take the ring for its thing, something like that. But he goes down there, and there's an idea. He says that the body is bigger than human, so it's not quite human. And he helps himself to the ring on the body's finger. just takes it. And later on, he discovers that if you turn it a certain way, it makes you invisible. And because he discovered that, he wasted no time in going to the palace, seducing the queen, plotting with her and killing the king, and then he becomes the king. So there's something there about, why wouldn't you have as much power and commit as much injustice as possible if you could get away with it? And Socrates seems to be trying to argue something to the contrary, that actually it might be better to be someone who is just but treated as if he is unjust.
Meaning?
That it's better to be someone who's, I suppose, like him, who's going to be put to death, but actually is as just as he is just, as opposed to someone who's unjust but pretending to be just and getting away with it and amassing, a fortune and killing this person and that person.
There's something of sort of bad faith in there a little bit. I don't know.
What do you mean? Tell me a bit more. Might be right.
Well, I was thinking it might be quite fun to do a Saturday SAFPAC where we went round and spoke for 7 or 8 minutes about what we'd do if we had this ring, really and honestly, And if what came out of that was just that we're, who knows what. But if we've got those, I'm just thinking of desires to walk into a shop and steal a little jewelry or something. Am I living in bad faith if I'm not doing that without the ring?
Well, the argument in Republic, I don't know, I wouldn't say that's bad faith, but the argument in Republic is that each of us could do that if we didn't fear the consequences. And, it says that we kill who we want, have sex with who we want, and we go around being like gods. If we could do that. Of course, we can't be visible and the big problem with these things. So in Thrasymachus presents it as saying that, of course, we all say, isn't it great that so is so virtuous? Isn't it great? But we think, what an idiot. Saying that sort of stuff.
Is there also something about fate, and if you're a shepherd, that's probably going to be your fate. Or there's not really a way to turn it around. If you're born a slave, there is a chance that you'll get a free man, but you're not going to become a king. There's no chance of you becoming rich.
Yes, no, I think you're right. I think the idea is the ring really helps him to seize power. And become sort of, more powerful and wealthy than you've ever been.
Can I just go back to what you were saying about him, writing as Socrates, speaking as someone else, and that I don't know how this fits into the sort of theme of the perfect state, but that sort of idea that art is a representation of what is only ever a representation already, the shadows on the wall.
Yes.
I'm just thinking how that sort of relates to maybe your story a bit with the guy who came to see you about achieving therapy generally. The stories and the words that we hear from clients are shadows of shadows of shadows.
Yes. So I think that's really important. I think it's related to the whole business about tone. How do you hear what someone said to you? I think that's really important. It's very, very much involved in what it is that we do, isn't it? That how is something spoken? Is it spoken in jest? That doesn't mean that you know what it means anyway. Or is it spoken, let's say, in exasperation? If someone says to you, "Oh, you're really a good therapist," who knows? Who knows what they mean?
But it's easy to just take it on board, right?
But remembering it's a replica, like it's a shadow of a shadow. It's a replica. Everything's a replica of something.
And yet, in it, doesn't he say that that's why art needs to be banned? Because
it's only a replica.
Yeah, it's a shadow, a replica of a shadow.
Taking us further away from the perfect.
from the person, yeah. Which I don't even remotely get.
And
So,
there's something said about shadows. I don't know if it's in the same vein as what you're referring to in the podcast, where they are sort of constricted to only look forward, and so they don't see the things around them, and they only see their shadows or things in shadows, and one person's allowed out, and they see that it's sort of the idea that maybe people don't want to see, or maybe people are restricted from seeing what is really around them, or maybe people don't want to see what's really around them. But either way, sometimes people just see what they want to see as well. A bit like, I'm not recalling whose idea of not looking at the ugly, at the vomit, the slime, thank you. Who did you say it was?
I was saying Christopher, but I think you're talking about Sartre.
Yeah. It reminded me of that, like not looking because you don't like what's there.
I think in that, they are chained and bound and unable, and unaware that they're chained and bound and unable.
But isn't there some kind of, I don't know, interpretation that could be made there that are we chained and bound?
Yes. I mean, that's what the claim is, that I think Glaucon says something about how these are strange prisons, and Socrates wants to say, well, no, they're like us. And I think the idea that we mistake shadows for reality,
Yeah.
I think is a good way of sort of talking about things, and related to what you were saying about words. That someone says a word and we think we know what they mean. But maybe the word is a shadow of a shadow. Who knows what it is that we're talking about? So I think that there are two things. One is about the whole thing about mistaking shadows for reality. And I think something that's in Republic, and I think it's in Nietzsche and Freud, which is about sleeping and dreaming. The idea that we are asleep, and we are dreaming things up, as opposed to awake. And the question, of course, is who makes that distinction between being asleep and being awake? Who can say? I would say who can say what really belongs in the non-dream, in the bit that's not dreaming? In fact, who's going to say what's real? Plato in Republic tries to talk about the philosopher king and queen. They are the person who is able to get in touch with what is eternal and unchanging. And I think that's the sort of thing that the forms are the sort of things that he thinks as real, and other things are somehow shadows. I would sort of try and think a bit like that about psychotherapy, isn't it? That we're trying to find out what's really true, what's eternal and unchanging. Everyone, what is universal, everybody has it.
I was thinking that it's quite similar to when you said about the cave, the analogy being that there's one person that's allowed to leave. Or is it, and I just, in that story, we see the person goes in and then he's instructed to kind of what he does, tell them about what he's seen as a way to try and get them to come out and see it for themselves or to have a better impression of it. But therapy is not like that. We're not going in and telling them what we think is the case. We're going in and maybe it's more like unchaining them and letting them find out themselves.
Develop a questioning mind rather than accepting what they think is real is real.
Yeah, to interpret shadows more as shadows rather than reality.
Yeah, I think that's a dangerous proposition because are we not kind of like avoiding all of our training and theory that we're soaking up that's, predisposing us to think a certain way, and then we are going into the cave, and even if we're not directly telling the client this is what you should think, that's a big part of what we do here, right, is try to convince ourselves we don't know anything, but in reality we're often kind of getting caught up in something with the client and bringing them one way and having to catch ourselves. So I don't think
where
this
does
is...
ethics come into play?
Yes.
What current notions of common sense?
Yeah, in what ways are we actually guiding them without realizing?
Well, see, I wondered. I don't know, but I'm wondering if, if we're thinking of that cave analogy, the therapist must be tied up the same as the client, facing the same way.
So,
And the idea that we're able to come out of the cave and then go back in, that's a bit tricky, isn't it?
It feels like maybe it's that a better analogy would be that maybe we are vaguely aware that these are shadows of other things.
Yes.
No more than that.
Yes.
And we're still chained and bound.
Yes.
But it might be worth trying to bring awareness that we might want to be looking at shadows.
Is it the quality of the shadows then is that we're interested in, like alienation? It's like the quality of the alienation. Is it the quality of the shadows? Is it we want to know, is that the actual shadow of the thing, or is it a shadow of the shadow, or all the layers of shadows that people can experience? Like how close is it to some sense of something?
Yeah, how would we know?
He says you can't.
I think the client can feel. Do you know that's what it is? It wouldn't be knowing. It would be what we talk about when we say becoming clear about something. Or the client feels a clarity about something. Maybe.
It also becomes harder to kind of draw realistic analogies in any way, just because therapy, what's going on, and what we're working with is all internal. The shadows and everything you're looking at is still external from you. It's on the wall in front of you. Whereas what we're kind of dealing with is people's internal thinking and feel and so forth. That's stuff which they're not necessarily seeing out there. They're kind of experiencing here.
Or I think with Onel's client, there's a bit of both, isn't there? Because his client has been told that he is a superior race, and he kind of acts like he believes it enough to feel that he has to hide it, but then at the same time he's dating somebody who is what his family sees, so there's a kind of real wrestling with what is true for him, I guess, because he's been told to believe something, and I'm assuming he doesn't believe it, but he also does.
Let's say that there are two things. Let's say that there is always a question about dreaming and waking, and that distinction, the inside-outside distinction. And the question, there's something said here. I can't remember where it is and exactly what's said. So I wish I could, but there's something about when a person comes to love the thing that they are lovingly associated with, or something like that, come to be like the thing that they're lovingly associated with. And I think the inside-outside distinction has got something to do with this, isn't it? That you might say that there are shadows on the wall as opposed to inside, but I don't know what to make of that distinction. There's an idea that what we take to be ourselves is the shadow that we see on the wall. I mean, I don't know if you go to close to that conference, but I'm not sure what to do with the inside-outside distinction. Maybe there isn't as much. And if it's, I want to say it's a bit like the what goes on in the city, what goes on in the state, has quite an effect on you. Let's put it that way. So what's outside you, you want to keep the outside-inside distinction. What's outside you probably very quickly becomes inside you.
There's a real dialectic to it, because he talks about turning the mind around. And that's a very binary thing. I know ethics is often dialectical. How it's often kind of put forward. Ethics, like Kierkegaard, is a choice between high and low. Are you going to take the high ground, or are you going to take the low ground? But it's very it's very binary at the same time, I think.
What's binary, do you think?
It's like you're either in the light or in the cave. I know he returns back to the cave having become enlightened, but it's very, in a way, it's very simple. Your mind is either turned the right way or the wrong way. There's all these shadows going on. It's hard to make sense of anything, and yet there's this kind of it's like a cognition between knowing and not knowing,
Yes,
and
yes.
and it's weird how do you then
See.
marry that with all of these shadows? It's
I think I see, and I think you're right that there is something about, it's not either the darkness of the cave or the bright light of outside. It's not just those two possibilities. I mean, there must be different sort of degrees of darkness in that sort of way.
in a way it's very complex because there's all these different kind of mirages and people get kind of caught on the shadows, and yet there's this very simple kind of like yes or no to it. I find it very hard to get my head around it in that sense.
Yeah. Well, I think, we've been talking a while, so I think, one of the things that we should say is that that's one of the problems with Republic, isn't it? In some ways, it's quite related to it. That Plato seems to think that the important thing is to be dominated by, or rather be ruled by reason. The light.
Could you say that again, Onel? I couldn't quite hear. To be dominated by
reason, I think. Reason. Yes, and I think there's an idea that the reason and the intellect is what should lead us. It's what should lead the city, and it's what should lead the individual. I think that's going on.
and what does he say reason is then? How do you know what is reason? That sounds daft, but it's
not daft, but
it sounds like you've got to think about it. It sounds very sort of cognitive, but maybe it's not.
It's not at all daft. I mean, I don't think he really tells us what it is, and I think he is thinking about something like cognition, like the intellect. I mean, but I'm not even sure it's even that straightforward. Actually.
I was thinking of kind of the Socratic method, just is sort of lack in terms of reasoning, that it's questioning everything until we allow it.
Yeah, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is that, of course, Socrates that we get in Republic doesn't seem to bear, it's again about shadows and stuff, but the Socrates we get in Republic maybe more Plato than Socrates. Maybe more Plato about the preoccupation with forms and the intellect.
It's still certainly related to the philosopher, the all of the philosopher being the one that takes the rational in order to understand. Not clear about how to do that. It's all for it.
It's not clear how to do what? Sorry, how to do?
Follow the rational path and become one of these kinds of philosophers.
Right.
So he has these paths.
They talked a bit about that in the podcast, didn't they? About behind, it wasn't about having beliefs, it was about people that had knowledge, which was or that is behind that.
Yeah.
In a way, and that only certain people could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of think I probably should speed up a bit. Maybe we shouldn't. I mean, that's my sort of thing. I wanted to say a couple of things before we start because I can't find it. But, we haven't really got to what I think is maybe the heart of the problem. We are getting to it now because I think there is something, isn't there, about being dominated by the intellect, by rationality, by reason, which is what Plato seems to be saying. He wants to say that. I mean, I don't know what the justice means, but I think righteous is one translation of that word that we use. Plato is very preoccupied with knowing and knowing the truth. For the objects, I somehow the truth. Now, I wanted to contrast it briefly, and I also can't find it, with Nietzsche, actually. I thought that would be a good move, and we'll see if it is. And I want to sort of say that it's possible to think of Nietzsche in the 1870s, that's when his first book came out, and the 1880s. And, he stopped writing in 1888. To think of him as preoccupied, I think as dancers, musicians, philosophers, and psychotherapists might be with the notion of balance, of holding things together that are varied and complex, of achieving some sort of harmony and unity, or at least not refusing to listen to dissonance. So I think there is something about whatever Nietzsche is doing which is more about that. And from the 1870s, he is preoccupied with the balance between what he calls the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And the themes of Apollo, the god Apollo, are all things, characteristics, attributes, I don't know, order, calm, rationality, logic, restraint, art such as sculpture, our sense of being an individual and separate. He wants a balance between that and what he calls the Dionysian, what belongs to the god Dionysus, and that is chaos, creativity, intuition, spontaneity, ecstasy, rage, madness, music, abandon dancing, and all that sort of takes us out of ourselves into a sense of being part of the raw world. And I think this issue of balance is threaded through his work. And it's easy for him to be accused of contradicting himself or of favouring and championing just what it is that he says is needed to balance things out. So I take Nietzsche as being preoccupied with a theoretical man. He says that about Socrates. So we're talking about reason and theory. And Nietzsche says that is a problem. But he doesn't say we should be irrational and never use reason and never have theory. He says they're too one-sided. They're too preoccupied with the intellect. We need to be more preoccupied with the things of Dionysus. And so we get into all kinds of nonsense about Nietzsche, about saying that what people say, well, he contradicts himself. Well, yes, he probably does. But, there are times when he's talking about the importance of more Apollonian sort of ideas, more Dionysian ones. I think I want to say something terrible in defense of his. Say, if someone says good morning to you 1 minute and says good night to you later on, they're not necessarily contradicting themselves. You've got to think about what's the context in which he's talking about these things. Anyway, so the Dionysian stuff is about how it is that one is able to enjoy and engage in life in spite of pain and suffering. He thinks of the Apollonian person, the person who's into logic and analysis, etc., as actually lacking sort of joy, love for life. Anyway, so I'm just sort of bringing that in, but I'm doing that because I say, of course, Republic, I think, is about that too. Republic is about a kind of balance, but, or a harmony or unity. But I think Plato is saying being dominated or being ruled by the intellect, both in the individual and in the city, is what we want. And I guess the sort of balance that Nietzsche is trying to talk about is not quite so intellect or reason heavy. Does that make sense? I don't know what I should say. There is stuff about Nietzsche and Freud which I don't have time to sort of go into. I think Nietzsche says somewhere that we are dreaming all the time. The things we do when we're awake, like things we do when we're asleep. And I kind of think that's close to what Freud is up to. And it goes back to the question about who decides then what's a dream and what's not? Who decides when you're making things up and not making things up? And of course, Plato has a way out, which is more like what's the thing. And I don't know if I've said to you or you've read that, of course, Plato has a very sort of radical idea in what the 4th century BC, that women could be philosophers, and be guardians, etc., like the men. And this odd idea that the guardian class should live in barracks and own no property at all. They shouldn't touch gold and silver, and we should have an absolute separation between the people who've got the power and the people who have the wealth. Really interesting. He also says there should be they should make sure who's run the city that there are no extremes of wealth and poverty. And if that goes back to something people say earlier, which I think is just really interesting ideas in that time.
When you speak of dreaming just then, you're not maybe also, but you're not necessarily only speaking of not being awake.
Well, Merleau-Ponty picks this idea of dreaming up, and I think he articulates it very well in Phenomenology of Perception. He would say that phenomenology is this kind of, what we're doing is constantly wrapping dreams. He would also say we're always dreaming, and he says we're constantly wrapping them around things into like a sort of an intricately woven fabric. So I think the dreaming is phenomenology in kind of action, if you like, just to say it like that. But then there's the question of what's being wrapped around. What are we wrapping our dreams around? Is
that shadows on shadows?
I think it's just something like that. Yeah, I think it's something like that. And yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Or like, is it dreaming to say women can be philosophers too? Or is it just, perhaps I'm being too literal and narrow-minded, is he talking about you're asleep and you're dreaming?
Let's say that one of the issues, like the inside-outside thing, and like the either bright light of day or the darkness thing, there must be, we might think, lots of space in between. And you might think that maybe whatever it is that we're up to probably leads to the evoking the possibility that lots of things are not remembered exactly as they said. Lots of things are remembered, thought about, or experienced in relation to what it is that the person might think or feel or want or desire. So there is a distinction between real and wake versus sleep and deluded. It's a bit too easy. We kind of know that whatever it is that we're involved with people, with ourselves, like, the memories that we have might not be as accurate as we think. So I would just say that Nietzsche says something about dreaming all the time. And I think if you start to think about things like projection, introjection, and identification, and all of that kind of stuff, well, you're not that far away from the idea that we're dreaming things up all the time.
Which is that we're playing.
Yeah, I suppose you could put it that way. Yes, I think so. Yes.
But there's someone like Leconte would be saying that we're not really always in control of how we dream. And Merleau-Ponty would be maybe along those lines as well.
We're not in control of it.
Yeah, I don't think we're always, like if you think about intentionality, I've often got confused with the idea of it as being like what I intend. And then where is my I really that I intend from? And I'm thinking about desire.
Yeah, I don't think of intentionality as having much to do with what you intend. I think intentionality is about saying something about how your desires are about something. So it's not about in something in your mind about. It's not cutting that link between outside and inside.
But maybe I was bringing the notion of being subjected to, like subjected to design. When I stopped on the way here to have a pizza, could I really help myself, kind of thing,
I think it's said in Freud and in Nietzsche too. There's something, isn't there, about how we see things from a particular perspective. Our desires and beliefs and expectations, etc., do shape what it is that we see and experience. So that's why I want to sort of fuss about the dreaming, not dreaming distinction. It's not that, it can't be that hard to fuss. Okay, well, I probably should be thinking that we're going to run out of time, and I better think about. Let's talk about time very quickly. Yeah? Let's talk about time with double speed. Should we try it? Anyone see it?
Yeah.
What did you think of it? I mean, it's destroyed, it's been burnt. Yeah. What
I saw Richard Curtis writing about it and thought, that's not going to be for me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a romantic comedy. And sorry, go on.
That's why I'm just having a coffee.
All right.
I thought it must have been a mistake that we were suggested to read that film. I didn't watch it.
You didn't watch it?
No, I just assumed it was a mistake. I thought I'm being asked to replay it on one hand, and then just listen to this podcast, and then watch this film. What does it say about me? Yeah, I thought it must have been a mistake.
Next week it's Heidegger and Love Actually.
I'll be there.
I was warned that you'd all hate it, and everyone would look at it and think, why would we read such a thing?
I like the concept, but it was bad.
It's interesting. People say polarized things about it. It's incredibly bad or it's incredibly good. It's interesting. Anyway, but should we not talk about it?
We should, because it must be the concept that you wanted to talk about.
Well,
Must have been what you were
I'm not sure. I put it together with Ring of Judges, actually. And I thought it was obvious that it had something to do with you could put the two things together. So
Sorry, I missed that. Could you repeat that? You put it with what?
the Ring of Gyges.
Okay.
Yes.
You know the
You see, I've gone on about that for a little while. Shall I say something about it, or is it okay?
No, I can look for it, but I just wanted to know what it was you said.
Okay, so there's an idea, isn't there, that if you get this great power, what you would do is you'd use it for just to make sure that you just for your own interest simply, and you do whatever you can and make sure that you succeed. Now, the person in the film, does he do just that?
No.
He doesn't quite. I think it's an interesting thing, and also I think public is about what's eternal, unchanging. It's about the forms are, and that's what's real. I think about time is about transience. It's about changing. It's about death. The State of the Republic starts off with that. It's about the mortality of his father. It's about his attempt to help his sister, which is part of his understanding that the power that he has is still limited. He can't. There are a couple of scenes where he wants to slip out of the room and go back in time and change what he's done, and he's not allowed to for one reason or another. And I kind of think about this whole idea of maybe someone said about Saturday, but I guess there's a thought, isn't there, about if we could go back in time to any particular time, which one would it be, and what would we change? So I find that sort of stuff interesting.
You mean historically or in our lives?
In our lives. I mean, I think the idea in about time is, of course, you can't go back to where you were not. You have to.
I think he chooses like the age of 21 because that makes it a much lighter film. Like if he'd chosen, I don't know, like an older character, I think it would just be so bleak. Like someone going back into their life and it would just be so like regretful and what they would change would like change so much of their life. Whereas because he's 21, he's not really like done anything. Yeah.
I guess it depends on which.
No, exactly.
Does it depend on which old person you're talking to? I mean, in Plato's Republic, the older man in that didn't have passions, anymore, and he's quite content.
But I just mean that, like, if it was like, say, a 30-year-old character, and then they were going back and changing things like that about their life, that would change so much. It's like you decided not to meet that person. If you decided not to, I don't know, take that job or whatever, it would change so much. Whereas this character is only 21, so he hasn't even not even really had his first relationship.
It's interesting though, because a lot of our clients come to us and they're coming with the foundations of it is stuff that's happened before they're 21.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean stuff that's not in their control, like. You know what I mean?
Probably wouldn't have been as good box office.
Yeah.
Was it?
I think it would be bleaker. That's what I'm saying.
Which cares, probably.
But yeah.
Do you all to a man and woman absolutely hate it? Is that
I like the sound of it. I like the form of it that you presented to me. It's quite,
so did watch it too.
the form that you presented is intriguing.
I watched it and I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. At least there's one person.
There's something in the going back to points in your own life. Sorry, if I can chat. Just maybe think about the shadows thing again, and that no point in his life was hammered down, that he could still go back and change things. It was all had an illusory quality.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I was thinking about the whole thing about memory and our ability to remember things. It's a bit like going back in time. And there is this science fiction trope is that you can't change anything if you go back in time. But I guess we probably change things in our memory all the time. How much we'd like things to be different from what they were.
The Guardian review, which rated it very highly.
Really? Okay.
But still the important lesson from it was to live in the moment.
I think that's correct. I think that's correct. I want to say that Republic is about being preoccupied with the eternal and the unchanging. And the about time has much more to do with our capacity to live with the moment and to sort of be with what's unfolding. Which I think is as part of the contrast.
Opens up the question, what does that mean? To live in the moment, doesn't it? Some people when you're taking advantage of the situation you find yourself.
I think that's true, but I think that if you think of it, whatever psychotherapy is, if you think that the therapist, it's something to do with that. I think we can think that the thing about this situation is to find out what is true, what is just true, and what is right. But I think there's something different about thinking that we have to stay with the things that change and might change, that are variable, that we don't understand. And there's something about we have to be there and experience what's happening, something like that.
It reminds me of embracing, when you talk about being present, embracing the consequences of our actions and the fact that you can't perfect it all. But I think there's something which is interesting in how we're responding to the film, which is that it's a rom-com, but it's about time, and we talk about Heidegger, but it's about time to some extent, but it is actually a very, very personal topics. And personally, my response to it is I like the nostalgia and I like the sentimentality of aspects of it, but the aspects being explored are quite fundamental.
I think so.
It occurs. The thing that this reminded me of is. Oh, sorry. Were you? It's hard to know. It's hard to time coming in. I've been sitting here thinking about how I find myself not trying to think, and as opposed to not trying not to think, but not trying to think, because I was thinking of Heidegger in what is called thinking. The idea there's a kind of thinking which sounds sort of what Plato's about. There's a kind of thinking that stops thought. And actually gets in the way of us being able to dream to dream with our clients in the way that Merlin Hunting is. And you can't try not to think, but I think you can not try to think if you get my meaning. And this is all kind of paradoxical, isn't it? And you can't make yourself not think, but you might catch yourself. And I'm not quite sure. I thought Nietzsche, something you were saying about Nietzsche, was more in that position than I have ever realised before with Nietzsche.
And you can't stop yourself thinking. You can't.
Not stop yourself thinking, but you might, rather than trying not to think, you might not try to think.
Well, I suppose one way of saying it maybe, and maybe it's just wrong, is that some things are probably not so much about thinking.
They're more about feeling.
I think that's what I'm kind of saying. It's more about dreaming and imagination.
Yes.
Are most clients coming to us, with trying not to let thoughts come to them, and therefore the kind of talking, the thinking is, I don't know if you call it displacement or what, but it's a way of preventing the thoughts they're terrified that might come to them. So that is a way of stopping, you call it thinking, stopping thoughts coming to you. It seems that for me, therapy is about enabling the client to allow whatever thoughts to come to them and be okay with it.
But I do think as therapists, though, we can get caught in that so easily. And I do spend time reminding myself, to not, if I find myself thinking too much in a session, I try to just stop it.
Yeah, you could say that if you find yourself thinking too much in a session, let's say you're much more a follower of whatever's going on in Republic, aren't you? In some way,
yes, exactly.
Much more close up in your intellect and all the rest of it. And Nietzsche is not saying you must not think. There are lots of places in his writing where he says, you've got to be able to think, you've got to learn to think. But I think there's something about you can overdo that. So people might say, About Time is a rom-com, and it gets time travel wrong, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, funny, I didn't think of it as a writer. It's just not, I didn't know who the writer was.
I'm not sure what Nietzsche is quite meaning by that. It seems to me that
by what? Sorry.
I'm not quite sure what Nietzsche means by thinking, but I think we all have been caught up in a system that encourages us not to think by thinking too much, and we've been trained to not allow odd thoughts, things that don't fit in with quite what's going on, or very stray, odd, difficult thoughts. We've all been trained to not allow them. And I think for me that's a kind of dreaming, when those kind of odd, I suddenly think odd things that don't seem quite right. Yeah.
No. I think it's really important. There is something in Republic where there is talk about how only the liaisons that are authorized by the rulers should happen, and basically, if the rulers should pretend that they're not doing that, and so that so there's an idea that if you have an unauthorized liaison, they should perhaps get rid of the child. And I think I like the whole sort of thing, and we didn't get to talk about it, but the whole idea of unauthorized thought. You think of the thought as a fruit of something or other, a fruit of your mind or whatever it is. That there's an idea that some are authorized, whatever that means. I mean, I think it means something about they are the thoughts that you might expect, and the thoughts that you might that you might be sort of praised or encouraged to have. But there are
the state accepts. Really.
The state accepts, maybe, or maybe even the society accepts. But they're the ones that are unauthorized, which I think are perhaps more interesting to us in a way. And I think Plato calls them the bastard thoughts at some point.
I think
Just
CBT calls them intrusive thoughts.
Who calls them that?
CBT.
Yeah, wow.
I don't think it's a coincidence that you've just mentioned pregnancy in that, Onel. That the child has to be killed. Was that what you said? There was something. Yes. The child of an illicit liaison has to be killed.
Yes. I think. I mean, I'm not sure how much I've got that right, but there's certainly the idea that they must be taken away, and disabled children must be killed.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the whole thing about how are we to take Republic? Do we think it's just absolutely straight? This is Plato's view, and that's the end of it. What is going on?
Or is he saying something? You see, in Merleau-Ponty, the enclosure of the dream is linked with pregnancy, fertility. That one might have a sort of a thought that's like a new something coming into being. Yeah. And so I found myself thinking, is Plato pointing out how we kill off, a pregnant thought, a new fertile bit of imagination. Is he saying that, or do we take him literally or not? No.
Yeah, I don't know how we take him. I read him and I think I don't understand him, but there could be so much. The whole thing about unauthorized or bastard thoughts really I think really interesting. It's exactly what we're interested in. And of course, I'm sure Republic would ban psychotherapy. I mean, certainly books on psychotherapy. we would. It shouldn't be allowed. I imagine.
Yes, it's like the illegitimate child, isn't it?
Yeah.
Was it saying that only philosophers then were going to be allowed to have the thoughts?
But you see, I don't know. I have to shut up. But you see, I think it's not even clear what's going on with the philosopher. It's not even clear what a philosopher is. It's not clear. But what is he doing with this thing? That he's kind of setting something up that we can argue about. How many centuries later? Anyway, I think I should stop.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
Can we thank Onel?